Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sorry, everybody. So here we go. Inshallah, today we're actually going to be discussing something I would say exciting in many ways because it kind of takes us into understanding how did the Sahaba actually transition from being obsessed with alcohol to something else. Like, how is it, we would usually imagine the Sahaba as being very religious. We would imagine, a society that is, I guess, utopian in some ways, but to actually have a history of being addicted to alcohol is a different ball game. It's a completely different thing because, of course, with alcohol comes a type of entertainment. With alcohol comes certain behaviors, and the list goes on because alcohol is khaba'ith. It's actually the main center. That's what the Prophet ﷺ called it. He called it the main center for deviation, the main center for all those wrong things that can go on and probably have a very strong grip on the person. And it can be something that is very hard for them to, let's say, get treatment from because it's a big deal. But of course, when we're speaking about alcohol, we're not just going to talk about that area. We'll talk about, those different questions and those different cases, and just to get an idea. But I thought it would be best so that I won't get off subject and find myself all over the place. Thought it would be good to just go over these 17 different things that Al-Qurtubi had pointed out on basically the tafsir for this ayah. So let's talk about this ayah in general. Let's go over it really quick. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe. Now, of course, whenever we would say Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, what did Abdullah ibn Mas'ud tell us? Well, that's right there talking to you. If you're really wanting to be part of this group, now it's directing the words at you. Innamal khamru wal maisir. That verily al-khamr, which is coming from the root kha ma ra. The root kha ma ra actually means to cover. So when you look at khimar, for example, you're talking about a covering. When you're talking about khamr, it's the actual substance that covers. What does it cover? Well, it covers the brain. It covers the person's ability to distinguish right from wrong, and of course, is not sober anymore, to intoxicated. Well, maisir. Al-maisir actually comes from the root ya sa ra, which actually means ease. But of course, maisir, it's not that it's bringing ease, but it's actually an easy way to sometimes play a game and probably get some money, which basically is gambling. So al-maisir is basically gambling. Al-ansab comes from the root na-sa-ba. Na-sa-ba actually means to stand. So when you're talking about to make something standing, al-ansab, it's basically the standing idols. In other words, it's talking about these statues that were used as representatives. And I think it's important to keep in mind that the that the pagan Arab, they didn't believe that al-ansab, or at least the idols themselves, were God, but they had distinguished between the actual God himself, and certainly the other gods, which they actually considered were representatives, or at least had the ability to give them the inspiration to God himself. So it's not that they didn't believe in God, and they definitely had known that this is not the actual God. And that's why they said, وَمَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. And that's why the ayah in Surah Al-Zumar, it said that they were saying, and the only reason why we would worship them is that so they would get us closer to God. In other words, give us an inspiration. And it's not that they had believed that they were God himself. A very important thing to keep in mind that the pagan Arab didn't necessarily believe in They didn't necessarily believe in what we believe in. So yes, they did believe in angels, but their belief in angels was really rather very superficial. They believed that they were just God's girls, basically. They didn't believe in Judgment Day. They believed then that that was all legendary. They didn't believe at all that we were going to get resurrected. They definitely completely did not even worship the idols, even the idols. They didn't worship them because they're going to be thinking that they're going to be held accountable if they don't. But they believe that if they don't worship the idols, that there was going to be something bad happening to them. It was, in other words, to worship the idols, that's what was going to bring a good luck, and it was going to make your life easier, but not necessarily something in the hereafter. So they were worshiping these gods because they thought that that was going to make their life go into the direction that they're looking for, but not necessarily in the hereafter. So the whole idea of definition of justice was more cultural. And that's why within their own culture, they considered that that's what would give us the structure and justice. But they didn't really think of, well, why? How is that supposed to happen? What's the philosophy behind all of that? They didn't think of it that way at all. Okay, al-Islam. Now this is related. Al-Ansab is related to al-Islam because al-Islam would be they had different, like they would be different arrows, and then they would put those arrows like in a bucket or something, and then that would be next to the Kaaba. And whenever they wanted to make a choice or a decision, they would go to those Islam, where they would go to those arrows, which would have to do, not to do, and what choices, what options there are out there. And then they would basically go there, worship the idol, or probably even give something to the idols. Something to the idols actually means not necessarily puja. It's not like food, as in Hinduism, but it would be to slaughter perhaps a sheep or a goat, or sometimes it can go as far as slaughtering human beings for it. Just like Abu Talib or Abdul Muttalib actually wanted to slaughter the Prophet ﷺ's father for one of the idols, until he had went to one of the priests or one of the monks there, and he basically suggested that no, instead of that, you can slaughter 100 camels instead of slaughtering your own favorite son. All right, so when you're looking at al-Islam, it was considered as their way of communicating, kind of like an istikhara, communicating with the gods, but this time they're giving them the right choices, the right decisions that they should be taking in life, and therefore they would just go take one of these draws, kind of like a fortune telling thing, and then it would determine for them whether they should go, should not go, whether they're doing the right thing, and so forth. And that was al-Azlam. So they were really dependent on these things. Rijs and Rijs or Rijz. So that Rijs and Rijz, so with a sin or a zay, both are actually in Al-Quran. There are differences of opinions on what the difference is. Min amal shaitan. So they're all from the actions. Al-amal is basically actions. So when you say min amal shaitan, does that mean shaitan himself is doing these things and that we're replicating shaitan's action? Or is it that shaitan himself is basically using these different ways, these different tools in order to get to our brain, to get to controlling our hearts, get to controlling our behavior. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, the root is جَنَبَ, and جَنَبَ could mean to side something. And when you look at to side something, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, it can be that you are seeking. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, you're seeking a different side. Or فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, when you're looking at, for example, جَنَبَ, الجنب means to be, for example, janb, something that's next to you. Okay, الجنابة is what actually, of course, it's basically when there's a mutual action that had caused basically the person to be in a state of sexual impurity. Okay, and فَاجْتَنِبُوا basically means you're taking aside away from it. So ijtinab, that no, you're actually taking aside to distance yourself away from it. لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. So the main reason is for it to give you success. Why? Because, in other words, these things do not give you success and certainly are basically the road to failure. إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء. الشيطان, the main object, the main reason why shaitan would get you involved in different things as that, it's basically, and how do I know? This is key. How do I know if something is good or wrong and whether something is, let's say, evil or good? Well, then you would want to look at the consequence. The consequence of things is basically one key thing to help you know whether this is something that is innocent, whether it is good, whether it is healthy. You would basically look at the consequence. If the consequence is going to take you to something probably peaceful, to something that is healthy, to something that is good, maximizing good, of course, is the main thing that Sharia is trying to give you, but maximizing good, not at the expense of certainly other goods, which is the hereafter. That's the main good that you would want to maximize, and certainly you will be maximizing the good for your akhirah many times at the expense of probably certain good things and pleasures in this dunya. So, of course, it's not maximizing happiness or maximizing, of course, some form of, I guess, entertainment. But no, it's making sure that it's bringing in justice and not injustice. So we would know if something is diabolical by looking at the consequence. If it's bringing in injustice, bringing in hatred, then that is actually from shaitan. That's how you would know whether something is good or bad, looking at the consequence. في الخمر ويصدكم عن ذكر الله. So, wait a minute. I should have actually done this one. So, if we're talking about fil khamri wal maisir, is that fil khamri wal maisir, is that the only area that shaitan would use in order to bring evil, whether we're speaking about animosity or hatred within the community? No. But this is to let us know and just recognize as an example, but the paradigm is anything that leads to al-adawa and al-baghda, anything that leads to animosity, anything that leads to injustice, anything that leads to harm is basically going to be taking the same paradigm as al-khamr wal-maisar. We're looking at paradigms here. وَيَصُدَّكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. And anything that takes you away from dhikrillah, from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even away from prayer, is basically going to be considered as leading you to the wrong thing. How is that? Well, if it's taking away your focus from focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means you're losing the main connection. It means you're losing the main connection between you and the purpose that preceded your existence, and also to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you should be turning to. Because so is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in need of our purpose, in need of our worship? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in need of your worship, because the hadith were really clear that even if you were at the heart and let's say the best obedience, as the obedience of the best person ever there, whether from the jinn or from the ins, that would not add on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power whatsoever. The person that needs this worship is really you, because you are wired with heart, brain, and spirit and body. Now, when you're looking at all of this, of course, if you get thirsty, you need water. But does the water need you. The water doesn't need you. So not every single need is necessarily meaning that this is, or that, for example, substance is basically gaining any type of a benefit from that. And it doesn't whatsoever always mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in any shape or form getting power from you by you worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's the other way around. You are the one that's in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're actually maximizing your own good, because that's the way that you were wired. You were wired to need and search for this kind of empowerment that basically makes you live your life, your health, your rizq, everything. You're always searching by your nature. You're always searching to maximize good. You're always searching to avoid evil. You're always searching for and working towards, investing your energy. You're doing all that you can, basically, because it's part of your instinct that we have to live to maximize good, and it's part of your nature. It's part of our own animal nature, human nature, that we're always trying to avoid death, always trying to avoid what leads to death, or whether it's illnesses or pain. So we're always searching in ways to remove pain. So whether the person is Muslim or not Muslim, they basically have that instinct. We're searching for ways to avoid pain, because we recognize if we don't have good health, that we're going to be facing pain. Pain can be a main thing, if probably is not the main thing, that makes humanity basically seek ways of success and seek ways to do different things in civilization. So pain is not necessarily evil, but sometimes pain can be a motivator that we are trying to avoid, and it would be kind of like this generator to keep us going, to maximize the good, because we recognize without us going to probably get a job, maybe eat healthy, maybe do what is right, that we would face the consequence of pain, which could probably be more than what we can handle. So we're afraid of that pain, and that acts as that generator. Well, that's not only in this life, but there's a certain paradigm in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was also telling us, well, you want to avoid the pain in the akhirah, here's what you need to do. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would motivate us through different pains, because we need to get into the maximized level of being good. Being good actually means being salih. Being salih. And the person that maximizes their salah gets to make it to the area that is absolute good, which is Jannah. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, hey, this is what you need to do in order to give you, of course, justice, to give you happiness, and to give you peace, you would basically need to consider that you need to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and turn to salah, not because that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in need of your salah, but you're actually the one in need of that. فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. Now this one actually came فهل أنتم منتهون? Are you making the final decision basically to end this? Now we're going to talk about the gradual I would say, process, and the gradual way that when this ayah was revealed and what really happened from one stage to another, to basically get the Muslims to let's say, transition from being addicts to later on having this grip to control their addiction, and then later on getting into the final stage of completely being free of this. وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ وَاحْذَرُوا, and obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obey the messenger. And of course, this is a warning right there. وَاحْذَرُوا فَإِن تَوَلَّيْتُمْ. فَإِن تَوَلَّيْتُمْ, if you were to turn away, in other words, to abstain, and you refuse to actually be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاعْلَمُوا, then just know that the Prophet ﷺ and his duty was mainly al-balagh. What is al-balagh? Al-balagh is basically to inform. Balagha actually means to reach something. So when you say balagha, that means to reach. And of course, al-balagh is to give that information, in other words, that information to reach you, for you to be, let's say, aware of it. Al-balagh al-mubin, to give you the clear and the clear, of course, and an obvious message and a clear message for you to basically be aware of it. Okay, let's go on with each and every single one of these points. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu basically said that the discourse here is basically for all the believers, that they should abstain and avoid all these different lusts and these different traditions, even though they were completely addicted to it during the time of Jahiliyyah. Now, I want to say one thing. When you look at the word Jahiliyyah, this was, let's call it, the Islamic description for that time. They didn't consider, like the people during Jahiliyyah, they didn't see themselves as doing Jahiliyyah. They didn't see themselves at all engaged in any form of that. Where does the word come from? So the word comes from Jahila. Let's look at the word. Jahiliyyah, we've got the word Jahila, which basically means to be unaware. It could also mean unaware, to not know. Okay, so at the end of the day, of course, al-Jahiliyyah was the Islamic description given to that time that would basically more describe the pre-prophetic time, all right, and basically considered that, well, this is the timing that distinguishes this point from when they were aware of the religion, when they were aware of the truth, and the time where they were unaware of the truth, and therefore they practiced certain practices that let their own nafs, their own addictions, their own pleasures, their own selves, basically be the centers that controlled the society. And certainly some of that still remained even when they had become Muslim. So you had some people, even though they had become Muslim, but I guess let's say the past, some of it remained, of course, affecting them. It still was, even if somebody might become Muslim, it would take a long time for them to rewire themselves to a new system. So that's the same thing. Even though they had become Muslim, some still had brought with them the old practices, the old habits, the old ideas, and the list goes on. And it still wasn't that, just not because the person just said the Shahada, that means everything became Jahiliyyah. And if it's one day, human beings are very complex, and you can't expect the change to be with a snap like that just because they had said their Shahada. Well, that wasn't just with the Sahaba. Are with us today, and with we could be also seeing that even with the Sahaba, somebody had probably a past, and then of course it was it was still coming with them, and it wasn't an easy transition. All right, and Ibn Atiyah basically said, well, that's right there, and this is basically right there. of course, telling them, well, we're not just talking about alcohol, but even the different ideas that they took with them, superstition, very similar to what is happening today. Their ideas that, hey, this brings a lucky charm, this brings you good luck, this will, and it's really weird. I would get a lot of people actually thinking some things that it's part of the religion when it's really nothing but superstition. And this is very common. These superstitious thoughts can actually overcome the society, and they would come with it as if it's part of the religion. All right. Well, what about alcohol? So at the time for the revelation of this ayah, that yet it was not considered as haram yet. Okay, not until the revelation of this ayah. Of course, the final time, or the final wording, when this ayah had announced at least the final stage that alcohol is haram, it wasn't until after the Battle of Uhud. It wasn't until after the Battle of Uhud, and Uhud was in the month of Shawwal in the third year Hijrah. Let's look at a little bit about the timeline. Okay, timeline is the Prophet ﷺ, stayed in Mecca approximately 12 years, 6 months, 12 years, 9 months, 12, give or take. It's not, it's not necessarily by the actual numbering here, because there are differences of opinions on exactly how many months, but 12 years and so. Okay, he stayed in Mecca for that long, then migrated to Medina. Okay, migrated to Medina. And when he had migrated to Medina, just a zoom out, he stayed in Medina for 11 years. That's when the Prophet ﷺ basically dies, after 11 years in Medina. Okay, so a total of 23 years da'wah takes place. So the Prophet ﷺ was calling to Islam for 23 years. The revelation of the Quran happened, and it took time of 23 years to be completed. Okay, so within these 23 years, you had the timing that the Sahaba used at the time wasn't using based on Hijrah 1, Hijrah 2, Hijrah 3. That wasn't until later. Okay, that wasn't until later, but the way that they had, let's say, considered the timing of something was based on perhaps a battle, perhaps an incident, and they would say, for example, well, after Uhud, after Badr, before Badr, etc. So it was considered based on incidents. So here we go. So we got the Battle of Uhud was in Shawwal, but they did have months. They did have months. Those months were actually known to them, so they did have months. But the years, it was more. That's why they would say, for example, عام الفيل, the year of the elephant, because they didn't have a number for it, so they would base it on the event. Okay. We went in certain details when we talked about al-maisir, when we talked about gambling, and certainly we went in details with that. And let's look at al-ansab as well. We went in those details when we did Surah al-Baqarah. Remember all those details. Al-ansab. Al-ansab, it was said that it was the al-asnam, basically the idols. And some scholars actually said it was the dice and chess. We're going to talk about that, inshallah, in certain details. But of course, and that's going to be coming in Surah Yunus, but we'll, inshallah, do our best to at least give you some glimpse of it. As for al-Azlam, it's basically al-Qidah. What is al-Qidah? Al-Qidah is basically the utensil, or this, I guess it's probably made of pottery, or who knows what it's made of. And they would basically put all these different these different arrows, which basically would have some do not do, and so forth. So we're not going to necessarily go in details with that. But of course, it was basically there for the ones that were considered as the priests that were taking care of the idols. So think of them as, there's a religious group that basically had a certain job, was to maintain the gods, to maintain the religious area, of course, giving it some sanctity and so forth. Like every single temple, you would have certain people that are just working there. So that's basically some of what some scholars had said. Well, Islam is basically speaking about these people and not necessarily the arrows themselves. In other words, it's basically talking about, let's call it a team that resembles a certain belief, a certain practice. All right, let's continue right there. Tahrim al-khamr. How did alcohol, the transition, how did it happen? So it was in a gradual process, and they had many things that actually happened. When you look at nawazil, what is nawazil? Nawazil are things that happened, and these things basically unexpected things happened, and not, let's say, a normal thing that would usually happen. And certainly, well, that's because they were completely addicted to drinking. And the first ayah that was revealed in regards to drinking was this ayah. So we're looking at Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 219. يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس. And they ask you about alcohol and gambling. Tell them that there is great harm in it, or in them, and there is some good coming to people. In other words, there's some benefit. So what is that supposed to mean? Well, when you're looking at al-khamr wal-maisir, or gambling, and perhaps, of course, drinking, the ayah was laying out one key thing. There's a lot of harm in it. What is it saying? Well, it was basically giving this indication that there is some harm that Islam itself, you would know, wants to avoid harm, but we're just letting you know that there's harm in it. How far can you go with this understanding? Okay, but at the same time, it didn't deny that there's probably some benefit, maybe economical benefit, perhaps, maybe something that some will tell you that it helps the person get some therapy and all of that, but absolutely not. Right there, the ayah was laying out just some hint that it contains a lot of evil and a lot of harm. So very few people from the Sahaba, when this ayah was revealed, very few people had actually taken the initiative to stop and avoid it. And some, of course, you've had some that understood at least this foundation, and they said, well, we don't need to get this big sin or this big harm. But then some, they basically said, well, what we're trying to get out of this is not the harm. We're just really aiming towards the good that is in it. So that's when another ayah was later revealed. لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. You should avoid drinking, or at least do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated. So when you're drunk, make sure you're not praying, because of course there were a couple incidents. You had some Sahaba that were reading the ayat completely off because they were drunk. You can't imagine Ali ibn Abi Talib, reading, for example, قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون, and completely flipping the words, because you would not imagine that happening, but you want to keep in mind that that's exactly what happened. He was the Imam reading قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ, and instead of saying لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ, I don't worship what you worship, he basically flipped the whole meaning. So they were really confused, like, what does that mean? Are we out of the fold of Islam right now? What happened? So some Another group, they basically also left drinking because they said it's going to pacify us away from our salah. It's going to basically distract us from focusing on our salah. But then you still had some say, well, I'll just drink it outside of the prayer times. That's when the ayah was revealed. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس. That's when that ayah that we're working on was revealed, and it became the final stage of announcing that it was completely forbidden. And therefore, you saw that, well, ما حرم الله شيئا أشد من الخمر. Many of them had said there was nothing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbidden as worse and even in, let's say, in a stronger way than alcohol. Let's look at Abu Maysara. Abu Maysara was a Sahabi, and a Sahabi who, well, probably not the most famous, but Abu Maysara was also a Mawla as well. Let's see. He said it was revealed because Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he had come to the Prophet ﷺ, and he started listing all the different harms that khamr or alcohol is bringing and what's happening to people. In other words, the implications that it was having on people's lives. And then he started invoking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring a final statement that would basically bring that complete announcement that it was forbidden. So he would start making dua, Allahumma bayyin lana fil khamri bayanan shafiya. He would make the dua, Ya Allah, give us a clear final statement in regards to alcohol. So this is Umar ibn Khattab was like, I just want, a clear final statement. We need to finalize and figure out what the ruling in regards to this is, because Umar ibn Khattab, you could see that he recognized that the whole thing about Sharia is to maximize good, to maximize certainly people's benefit, and basically to bring about the interest to their favor, and basically bring about the favors to the society, whether socially or whether economically, and the list goes on and on. So this ayah was revealed. So Umar ibn Khattab then said, Intahayna, intahayna. What is intahayna? We are done, we are done. In other words, a final wording that we're basically ending with all of this. And you could see right there where it was at least intahayna, intahayna, you could see it was narrated by Ahmad, Abu Dawood, and Nasa'i. You could say at least the resources. Abu Maysara, I wanted to give you the name, Amr ibn Shurahbil al-Hamadani. All right, Amr ibn Shurahbil al-Hamadani. Okay, let's continue right there. Abu Dawood, upon Ibn Abbas. Who's Ibn Abbas? Abdullah ibn Abbas. Abdullah ibn Abbas is the Prophet's cousin. When the Prophet ﷺ had died, he was only approximately 13, 12 years old. And Abdullah ibn Abbas is basically the Sahabi that the Prophet ﷺ had made the dua, Allahumma faqihhu fi din wa allimhu ta'wil. Ya Allah, teach him the matters and inspire him, that is with the matters of deen, and inspire him to have the knowledge of explaining the religion. Okay, he said, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la taqrabu as-salata wa antum sukara wa yas'alunaka 'anil khamri wal maisir and innamal khamru wal maisir wal ansab. Okay, what did he want to say? Okay, so basically wanted to say the stages, that these ayat were revealed in order to speak about the alcohol. And he said this ayah, إِنَّمَا الْخَمْرُ وَالْمَيْسِرُ وَالْأَنصَابُ, basically the last ayah, he said it was abrogating all the previous ayat. Well, so what does it mean to abrogate? Abrogation only happens to rulings. You cannot abrogate a fact. A fact is a fact. It doesn't change. But a ruling can change. So that's why you will basically have certain ayat. For example, during the early stages of Islam, we had alcohol was still not considered haram in the early stages. It wasn't until later on when we had seen Umar ibn Khattab, Allahumma bayyin lana fil khamri bayanan shafiya, that of course, finally the final stage was announcing that khamr is completely prohibited, and that was abrogating it. Okay, now looking at that, it wasn't just khamr. Same thing when we're talking about hijab, same thing when we're talking about fasting. There are certain ayat that were revealed later. And here, Abdullah ibn Abbas wanted to say the stages and the different ayat that basically this ayah that we are working on, which basically is right there. Okay, إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب, that this is the final ayah that abrogated the previous two ayat. Well, does that mean if it's abrogated, then why should we even read it? Why should we even take it in consideration? If it's abrogated, it's basically canceled out? No, that doesn't mean it's basically canceled out. The recitation of it stays. The practice, we would basically also get the inspiration, basically learn from it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we would cancel it to mean that it becomes nullified, or we would basically leave it. It would simply mean we are right there canceling the practice of it. So now we're going into a new stage, and a new stage of what the new practice is basically containing. All right, let's look at then into this hadith, Sahih Muslim. And when you say Sahih Muslim, we're basically talking about an authentic hadith right there, that Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Who's Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas? Just a fast idea about Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas is one of the 10 promised Jannah. Okay, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, when he had actually become Muslim, he was rather within his teenage. Let's see, he said, when this ayah was revealed from the Quran, and he said, I had come to a group from Al-Ansar. And when you look at this one in the brackets, what he wanted to say is that you had other manuscripts for the book that we're working on, which basically is Tafseer al-Qurtubi, that in other manuscripts it was saying, and in Muhajirin. Okay, so just a note. Okay, why is this in brackets? That's what he was trying to say. So he had come to a group from Al-Ansar. Basically, Al-Ansar are the Sahaba that were residents of Medina. So they basically said, hey, we're going to feed you. We're going to give you some drinking to basically, it's kind of like we're going to have a fun party right there. And that was way before khamr was regarded as haram. And then he said, so I had come to them in that garden, and certainly they were having barbecue basically right there. Jazurun mashwi. What is al-jazur? Al-jazur is basically, they were having a barbecue right there, but the barbecue was basically right there, that camel. And waziqun min khamr. And it was like a whole jug of alcohol right there. So they was really having a partying time. And he said, so I had eaten and I had drunk with them. And then of course, it was mentioned with Al-Ansar, within that group, and they were sitting together, and Al-Ansar wal Muhajirin, and what happened, each one was trying to hail and support basically their own group. So they started saying, well, the Muhajirin, one started saying, and Muhajirun, or the immigrants, are better than the Ansar. And the other ones basically started, each one hailing for the other. And that's when one of them actually, went, I guess, fierce, and then just hit the other person without them, of course, realizing right now this debate all of a sudden became a bloody debate. And of course, you could say that even Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas then had a bloody nose. They all came to the Prophet ﷺ, and they told him about the story. And that's when, of course, the final ayat, so this is according to Sahih Muslim, that is the main story, or at least the main context behind why was khamr. Finally, of course, this ayah was bringing in the final revelation to why was khamr finally considered as not permissible, because it was bringing in, I guess, right there, it was bringing in the jahiliyyah, and they could be unaware of what they're practicing, and it could go really wrong in their relationship. So let's, just say that. it could have been it could have gone really wrong. I mean, subhanallah, you could see, and it's like it's kind of strange to actually see, you know, that it's so similar to different cultures. If you whether you go east and west, you would see that things like barbecue, drinking, guys sitting together, they're having fun, and they're debating about the same things that we would usually debate on. This group of people is better, and of course, without them realizing, they go into this type of an argument. This type of an argument where, similar to our Jahiliyyah arguments of today, where we're probably thinking that this group of people is better, or probably talking about ourselves, or probably talking about just trying to boast. And of course, certainly when a person is drunk, they can go again violent without them realizing. And by the way, it's quite sad to say, very quite sad to say, that drinking is a lot more common in the Muslim society than we think. I didn't know that. And believe it or not, I've had a uh, number of different girls actually come to me, whether while I was in prison doing chaplaincy work. Alhamdulillah, I was never imprisoned, but I was doing chaplaincy work. Alcohol is a lot more common, definitely in men than women, but it was still there. And I think we definitely need to explain and bring in that, let's call it religious therapy, religious inspiration, to let people know that this is a serious matter right there. It is something that is definitely a lot more common in one community than another. So I don't want to right now speak about a certain community and then, of course, I would say excite someone's jahiliyyah. I don't want to excite any jahiliyyah, but certainly it is more common in certain communities. And there's nothing wrong with saying certain communities have a certain, let's say, problem that is probably more common than another community. Another community might have another problem. So yeah, that's a different story. So you'll have certain communities have more of a drug problem. Other communities might have more of an alcohol problem. Other communities, zina problem. Third communities, maybe gambling problem. And other communities, perhaps just selling. You go to California, for example, liquor stores are mainly owned by Muslims, unfortunately. So that this is quite sad to actually see. And I don't want to say which group that of people that is. You would not expect it whatsoever, but it's unfortunately the sad reality. Same thing. You go to perhaps maybe Minnesota. The most ones to own basically tobacco stores are owned by Muslims, and without mentioning which group of people. Same thing when you're talking about different groups. Perhaps in Michigan, you would say certain dancing areas, etc., owned by Muslims, and then, of course, without mentioning any names. And the list goes on and on. Of course, it's not exclusive to this or that group, but it's worth mentioning that sometimes it is a fitna that we sometimes have to be aware of. Okay. And of course, these hadith definitely indicate, when you look at this hadith, that, hey, they were having this barbecue, they were, hash right there. We even say hash wa nash even during our times today, but al-hash here and al-hush is basically that garden. Okay. And you could say that, yes, there's no doubt that drinking was a common culture during that time, and it was considered as permissible, and it was very common and something that they had practiced. In fact, no one would say anything wrong about it. It was considered that, well, it's a practice, everybody does it, and it was normalized, and nothing was considered as wrong with it, and nobody would say anything about it. And in fact, even the Prophet ﷺ didn't say much about it. Okay. And it wasn't until, of course, the ayat were taking them into one stage after another. Now, here's one thing. What do we get as an inspiration out of all of this? Sometimes it's part of al-hikmah, part of wisdom, that when we know someone has a particular, let's say, habit, it can sometimes take, let's say, different stages, and especially those that are working in da'wah. And if you're going to prisons, for example, you don't want to rush people into doing certain practices and considering them, yeah, this is what you need to get to. Of course, you definitely have to let them be aware that, this is haram, but, work on getting to that level. It could be a process. I'll give you an example. It's very common that we would get sisters that are probably happily married. She would convert to Islam and then wonder, am I supposed to leave my husband, or how do we do it? Certainly, it's haram for a Muslim woman to stay in a marriage relationship with a non-Muslim man. There's no doubt about that. But if this woman is coming in and she's saying, well, I can't leave my husband, I'm not there yet ready. So in that situation, we would just let her know that this is what we're trying to get to. This is the goal, that you would want to, I guess, work out your faith, your iman, to get to that level of, it's not just focused on leaving this marriage, but it's also focused on trying to make your life exclusive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not necessarily based on what you would want your life to look like, but it's submitting yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So during that moment when they're probably not ready, would we tell them not to embrace Islam, not to do their shahada? No, we'll say, do your shahada, spare yourself from hellfire, and work the other things out. She's probably an alcoholic, maybe a person that is a drug addict, probably, all that clubbing lifestyle and all of that. We would say, hey, let's work on that. We're going to try to see how we can help you cleanse yourself from all this lifestyle into making it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It can take months, it can take years for some, and it can never happen for others. And I had seen certain people that were so addicted and, subhanAllah, completely transitioned. It wasn't easy at all. It definitely required a lot of effort. But if you're a da'iyah trying to help somebody, just recognize that your main duty is to help them transition. Don't change the religion and tell them that it's halal for now. It's not halal ever. Okay? It's not halal ever, but it's trying to seek that therapy to get to that point. But right now, let's see how we can give you the power to let's say, weaken that shahwa, or that lust that is controlling you. So what can we do? Can we change perhaps the society, the environment? Is it the friends? Is it the substance itself? And it's important to keep in mind that a lot of substance addiction actually comes either from certain groups, peers, or it can come when a person is isolated. So just look at these patterns. When we're talking about certain groups, we're speaking about perhaps friends, perhaps maybe a place that they like to hang out in, and so forth. And sometimes it's isolation. Person probably went through a certain trauma, probably went through certain things that they found this urge, this addiction to be, whenever they're alone, they manage to find themselves somewhere, finding that as a place of entertainment instead of people. So for the person that find such addiction, whether it's addiction on perhaps maybe alcohol or addiction on porn or drugs, etc., we would need to get them out of their isolation. And that's going to help them find, and of course, we're talking about healthy groups, find an alternative to that entertainment and find an alternative, at least with a group. And if that person basically is finding such an addiction by hanging out with these peers, by hanging out with these people, then in that situation, we need to let them perhaps change the city, maybe change the people if they're able to, maybe change the job. And that way they'll probably find new people to encounter, new people to meet up with, etc. And definitely changing the city is one key thing because, well, by changing the city, remember the guy that killed 100 people? What was he recommended? He was recommended to change the whole city. Why? Because by changing the city, you're changing the job, you're changing the environment, you're changing the neighborhood, you're changing the people, you're changing yourself because you're adapting to a completely new system. Maybe changing the country could be key because you're changing everything. You could even be changing the place that you're probably shopping in. Everything is completely new and you're adapting to a new thing. So by changing everything that surrounds you and adapting to a new thing, sometimes this can be key. Okay, just to keep in mind, it's not the same for everyone. Is it important to also probably seek these institutions to give therapy? Definitely. We do have Khalil Center in Chicago, I believe, in Illinois. We have Wafa Center. We have a couple centers within the US to treat with addiction. And certainly ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. If of course this treatment they weren't capable of doing on their own, sometimes you would have to direct these people to go to these centers. So we're not all trained, and definitely I'm not trained. Most of you are, I'm assuming, are also not trained to deal with addiction. So sometimes certainly certain levels of addiction, they would give them a certain dose just to help them gradually get out of this addiction. So not necessarily a cold turkey. So in that situation, we would basically let those specialists and those trained professionals basically help them out of this addiction. So don't necessarily think that, oh, I'm going to do all the job by myself, get this person out of addiction. No, it's important sometimes to let those that are trained to do that and let them basically help them out of such addiction. Okay. The question is, was it permissible at any point that they would be drinking to a certain level? In other words, just as long as you don't get completely drunk, was that permissible at all? Was there any time in Islam that you were allowed to drink as long as it was, let's call it, occasional, in occasional drinking? It wasn't necessarily getting the person drunk. They were, let's say, drinking. What is the word that they would use? Responsibly, drinking responsibly.
Or
That's the word that they.
casual.
Casual, there you go. Casual drinking responsibly. Was that at all considered in Islam at all? Let's see. So here's a hadith in regards to Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib. What happened? So what he did, Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, of course, he was, I guess, drunk right there, and then what he did was he basically cut the hunchback and of those camels, basically the hump for those camels. And then Ali ibn Abi Talib went to the Prophet ﷺ, and Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib had come, and of course he when he came to the Prophet ﷺ, he was talking to him. I want to keep in mind, Hamza is the same age as the Prophet ﷺ, and Hamza was the milk brother for the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. And it was obvious that Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, when he was talking in the way that he was talking with the Prophet ﷺ, it wasn't as respectful as it was supposed to be. And certainly, in other words, he really had gone off board because he was completely drunk. So the Prophet ﷺ had known that he was completely drunk, completely unaware of what he was doing, to the point that he even cut off the hump from, of course, Ali ibn Abi Talib's camels. So the Prophet ﷺ didn't necessarily, I guess, scold Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib for speaking to the Prophet ﷺ in a way that was rather disrespectful. It wasn't until while he was, of course, because he was talking to him while he was drunk, but it wasn't until later. So some scholars actually considered that point when it wasn't yet haram, and they might have gotten to a stage to probably being drunk and drinking to the point of being drunk, were they necessarily held accountable the same way that of course, somebody else, while they're not drunk, being held accountable for their behavior? And that's the same thing where you would go this debate, where what is the implication of this debate? Well, this debate goes into another debate, which is, let's say somebody is drunk and then divorced their wife, or probably said a word of kufr. Are they held accountable even though definitely they were not completely aware of what they were saying? Is their wife right now considered as divorced or not? That's another debate. So you see what's coming out of this debate is that, well, look, the Prophet ﷺ didn't scold Hamza for what he was saying disrespectfully to the Prophet ﷺ, because at the time, yet khamr was not considered as haram. But the Prophet ﷺ wasn't holding him accountable the same way if you were probably not intoxicated. So, I mean, that's not the only evidence for that debate. I'm just letting you see, I would say, just kind of glimpse of where and what this debate is about. All right. So that's I guess the center of a debate between the fundamentals, the scholars that are specialized in the usul al-fiqh, or the fundamentals of fiqh. And they said, well, some scholars actually said alcohol and getting a person to the level of being drunk is actually considered haram in each and every single sharia. In other words, it was throughout history that you were not supposed to get intoxicated, because Sharia is all about bringing and maximizing the good for the people. And of course, the most important thing of maximizing good is basically centered around our brain. And if the person was basically right there, intoxicating the brain, which is the center to bringing and maximizing what is good, then in that situation, what we're supposed to be doing is preventing anything that acts as an obstacle from maximizing the good. So it's basically saying that if A leads to B and B leads to C, then A leads to C. Then it's all correlated with one another. And therefore, looking at that, when we're looking at the hadith in regards to Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, when he went drunk and said disrespectful things to the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ didn't scold him for the words that he was saying. All right. So some scholars actually took it that, well, taking in consideration that when the person was drunk, that they didn't necessarily mean what they were saying, but do we hold the person accountable? And in other words, does the implication go that, for example, if you were to say you're divorced, or if you were to probably end a transaction, or, do certain actions, are we going to hold them accountable the same way if they were alert? But then the debate goes farther, because if you're going to assume that you're not going to hold them accountable for the action, what if they were to commit a crime? Are we going to say, well, that person can claim that they were drunk at the time, that they probably killed their own child, and that they were completely aware? Are we going to say, well, yes, since you were drunk at the time, okay, we'll let that happen. Just make sure you don't get yourself too drunk, okay? We can't do that. Because anybody could just come forward and say, when they had probably committed a crime or probably did something wrong, that they could think that they could just get away with it by saying they were mentally, I guess, not in the complete state of mind. They weren't sober enough to be held accountable. Oh, and that can lead to a lot of injustices happening, and people can be claiming that they were at the time not sober enough and not aware enough to be held accountable. And then what you're going to see is injustices being rampant within the society. And that's quite dangerous. So that's why you had some scholars say that no, just by being drunk, that's not necessarily something that we would say they can get away with the different sins that they could be doing, and say, well, we're not going to hold them accountable because it can go really ugly within the society. But in a matter of fact, no, some scholars actually said no, they're going to be held accountable, and even more accountable, because if we have enough shuhud to say, well, we've got the witnesses right there witnessing that this person divorced his wife or this person killed, and we've got evidences, cameras, etc., we've got everything to prove that this happened, then we're going to hold that person accountable. And that's the preponderant, wallahu a'lam. Okay, let's continue. The fourth one, the word rijs. What is rijs? Rijs actually means it is impure. Let's see, Ibn Abbas. Why are we pointing out Ibn Abbas? Because the Prophet ﷺ had said, Allahumma faqihu fi din wa alimhu ta'wil. Ya Allah, give him the knowledge in the deen, and let him basically be capable, and give him the inspiration to ta'wil, basically interpret the religion. So he said, rijs actually means curse. Sukht means curse. When we say this ayah, al-khamr, al-maysir, al-ansab, al-azlam are rijs, it means it's a curse. Okay, but here's one thing. When you look at curse, or sometimes something that is to be abandoned, because when you're cursing something, you're abandoning it. Okay, so it is also, when you speak about the word rijs, there is a literal meaning, which basically means impure or a contamination. And you're thinking of things like, for example, feces and just different disgusting things. That's all rijs or rijs. These two words, let's look at these two words right there. They actually quite mean the same thing, rijs and drijs. Okay, but a rijs could also mean something that is a torture, a punishment, some painful thing. All right, and a riks is more, also rijs, riks, it really means the same thing, but usually it refers to things like feces, things that are basically as disgusting as that. So min amal al-shaytan, what that means is that these actions are min amal al-shaytan, basically to say that what shaitan would do is intimidate you, and certainly yuzayyinuhu. What is yuzayyinuhu? Intimidate it, or probably give it the narration. Give it the narrative, not the narration, but give it the narrative and some rhetoric to make it seem that it is something good, probably a spiritual drink, or probably that, hey, we're just having fun, and of course these different ways in making it that it's associating it with that it's bringing in a certain level of joy, a certain level of fun, a certain level of course, entertainment and so forth. And certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was indicating that no, it is actually to be mentioned by what it truly is. It is something that is disgusting. It is something that when we say disgusting, that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called it. It's rijs. Rijs meaning it's disgusting, as other things are disgusting, as other substances are. You would recognize some substances are disgusting. Well, this is not any different from those substances, because disgusting substances, you would recognize it from the smell of it. You would recognize it perhaps from the texture of it. You would recognize it from the place that it exits from. You would recognize it from the area that you would want to disassociate yourself from. And same thing. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know that this is not of less of any less than those different substances. So in other words, it basically contains the same ruling of it, because it is min amal shaitan, from the actions of shaitan. In other words, shaitan himself is basically telling you to do that, telling you to get into that field, and definitely it's basically based on mabadi', and of course the principles that the shaitan himself wants you to get into. What is it? Well, so in that situation, what we're supposed to be dealing with, fajtanibu, you're supposed to be avoiding it. What is fajtanibu? Avoiding it. In other words, make it as something that is opposite of where you would be. Okay. So in other words, you could see those ahadith, the different sources, resources of ahadith, or even, of course, ijma' al-ummah, the consensus from scholars, that all these are basically indicating that it is basically haram, and there's no differences of opinions in Surah Al-Ma'idah that it was actually there to completely bring an end and a complete total prohibition in regards to alcohol. And of course, Surah Al-Ma'idah, we said it was a Madani surah in the last of what was revealed, and of course things like as drinking blood, eating pork, all of that, of course, you could see in Surah Al-An'am basically had come to also indicate, and of course come in with the same idea that these things are basically haram. And in al-khamr basically came in to bring about a complete and absolute prohibition, and the strongest level of prohibition. Here's one thing. Many times people would come and say, well, I need an ayah to say that al-khamr is, I want the word haram. If you want to say that it's haram, well, I need an ayah that really says khamr is haram, and not the word fajtanibu. Well, this is, I would say, ignorance in Lugha Arabiya, because to say that something is prohibited, it doesn't have to use the word haram. Okay. In fact, the word fajtanibu is even farther, and let me say stronger, in indicating the prohibition of something than the word haram. Because the word haram, it's telling you that that actual behavior, substance, whatever it is basically something that you have to avoid. But fajtanibu is actually going and taking us farther and telling us that even if it's an area, probably a party that they have drinking in it, even though you yourself are probably not drinking, but you would still have to avoid being within that area. What? But I'm not going to be drinking. Yes, but the ayah says fajtanibu. So whether it's at a table whether it's at a party, whether it's at, in a certain area, just abandon that area completely. That's what the word fajtanibu means. So it's not necessarily you not engaging in that action, but it's that you want to make sure that you keep a huge distance between you, the action, the environment, the people, etc., to keep you maintained within your spiritual purity, within your spiritual purification. Okay, let's see. When this ayah was revealed, Ibn Abbas had said, when this ayah was revealed, a group of the Prophet's companions, they went to one another and they started basically right there coming to each other and saying, hey, al-khamr was actually made as haram. In fact, it was made equivalent to shirk. Look at this one. That it was, that now what are they doing right now? It's like they're spreading out the news to each other, to one another, that, hey, we're Muslim. And guess what? There was an ayah that was revealed. And I want you to look at this one because they understood that lugha Arabiya, when it said fajtanibu, they understood very well that the Arabi language right there was indicating that alcohol drinking was almost, or at least equivalent to, the worst sin that they had known, which was basically associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and shirk. So they understood by looking at al-khamr, al-ansab, al-azlam, that it was right there associating khamr and basically gambling, associating it on the same level. It's like, why would you put together this? You would put it together because you would recognize that it's within the same category. It's within the same type of culture. It's within the same area. It's at the same level, basically. So they said it was basically right there, associated and considered as exactly like they would slaughter for those idols. And therefore, they said they looked into those words and they recognized that once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would let us know that al-khamr, al-ansab, al-azlam, these things are basically at the same level in their, let's say, in the gravity of that behavior, that's in order to tell us that yes, they just as al-ansab wal-azlam leads to hellfire, that this could also lead in the same way, in the same probably momentum, probably in the same gravity as basically shirk itself. And that's why it ended with لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. If you really want to be successful, then you really got to take these matters seriously and not think of it, well, as long as I'm not doing shirk. But no, it's actually at the same level mentioned in that ayah. And of course, let's look at this one. So, now that we're going to a different discussion, point number 6 is completely different than the previous discussion. Let's look at it. He said a majority of the scholars had understood that when the ayah was saying al-khamr is rijs, some scholars actually had taken that the word rijs actually means that alcohol in itself, meaning the substance. Okay, yes, we understand you're supposed to avoid it. We understand, you're not supposed to be engaging with that. But let's just assume, okay, some alcohol for some weird reason, okay, basically spilled on your garment. Alcohol, wine spilled on your garment. Does that mean that you can't even pray with that? I know it smells, it stinks. We know all of that, okay? But how do we understand all of this? Does that mean it's impure? Or does that mean it's not? Or does this mean that this is actually talking about it as a metaphorically impure and not really linguistically impure, just as urine? Okay, so if we're talking about urine, you definitely have no option. There's no question about that, that substance is impure and must be washed, and you cannot pray with that. At least the area that basically has the impurity on it. There's no question about that. But then they went into debate whether al-khamr has the same ruling as the impurity of let's say maybe urine, and is this a metaphor or is this literally impure? How do we understand that? So let's say the first opinion basically said it was impure, and you had other scholars basically say, here's point number two, that no, it is pure. Let's see, well, who actually said that? Okay, let's see, the ones that said it was impure, they said, well, right there, why would you say that this word, which we know is meaning that it's impure, why would you say that it's metaphorically when it is literally saying it that it's impure right there? So why would you use a metaphorical interpretation and let go of the literal interpretation when you don't have any evidence according to those scholars? So the second opinion said that no, it in itself is pure, but it is describing it as a metaphor that it's a disgusting behavior, it's a disgusting thing, it would lead to harm, it would lead to injustice, it would lead to all the evil things out there, and considered that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as impure is not necessarily the actual substance, but it was regarding basically drinking it as metaphorically, that's what's disgusting. Drinking it was disgusting and not the actual substance in itself. And of course, now, this one's rather interesting. What's the evidence? So they said, well, let's look at this hadith, Sa'id ibn al-Haddad, and that basically narrated that when استدل سعيد بن الحداد, sorry, Sa'id ibn al-Haddad basically had used this evidence, and he said it's pure. And the evidence is when the ayah was revealed saying that alcohol drinking was haram, basically that ayah that we were working on, and what the Sahaba had done, they basically had broken their jugs and spilled all their alcohol in the streets of Medina. And they said, and he said, if that was considered impure, then you definitely would not have seen them spill it in Medina, because people are going to be walking past by it, etc. Then if you're spilling, it's exactly like letting the sewage right there open. That's what you're going to be assuming. It's going to take the same opinion. Would you really urinate anywhere? And there are certain designated areas because you wanted to make sure that other people and other things are not getting contaminated in the same way. All right. And he said, if that was considered impure, then the Prophet ﷺ would have told them, well, don't get the place impure. And he would have told them to not get that everywhere, exactly the same way when the Prophet ﷺ had basically forbidden them from urinating in the middle of the way. Or it wasn't just for the reason of modesty, but it's in order to also let there be designated areas and certain spaces that are basically may take impurity, but you're not going to get people contaminated with this impurity, because they said, well, his evidence that is Sa'id ibn al-Haddad, this is a scholar, this isn't a Sahabi, by the way, okay, it basically said, well, look, I mean, the way that the Prophet ﷺ was telling them to urinate in certain areas and not in the middle of the way, but he didn't say the same words in regards to alcohol, basically said, he said, well, that's our evidence. It's not necessarily impure per se, but it's basically impure metaphorically. Let's see. And of course, al-Qurtubi wanted to respond to that. And he said, well, Sahaba did that not because Not because they didn't regard it as impure, meaning the actual substance, but that's because it's not that they had like a certain sewage system or certain wells or certain areas where they could spill impurity in. They didn't have these private bathrooms or even, designated areas where they put the impurity. And that's what Sayyidah Aisha had said. Sayyidah Aisha basically said that they even used to يتقذرون من اتخاذ الكنف في البيت. They used to get so disgusted in having these private areas where they would do their natural business in a specific area. It was just considered as disgusting. So they would only go far away in far areas and basically like dig a hole, do their business, and then close it up. And that was considered as that's the clean way to do it. So it wasn't in the bathroom. So when you're looking, they didn't have bathrooms at the time. Okay. So at the same time, since they didn't even have bathrooms, and certainly they didn't also have a designated area where it was considered like a dumping area. So then therefore, they're really living out in the nature. So they just basically, it was going to be, rather hard and I guess a burden to carry all these jugs out in the skirts of Medina. So it was, just get it out of your home and just spill on the ground and the earth will just absorb it. And that's, and of course it would be easy for them to, if you were seeing something, of course, spilled on the floor, just jump over it and just, of course, just don't get yourself contaminated. And it was going to be easier to just, I guess, hop over it than actually carry a whole jug and take it where, that business dumping area where التغوط was actually happening. So that was, just, I want you to just look at the debate, okay? So what would we say the preponderant? What do you think? You're listening to this debate right now. It's quite interesting to see how they would debate those evidences. All right. We're just gonna, let's see, Riz. So here, of course, he wanted to say, well, our evidence is that no, the word rijs, you should not go to a metaphorical interpretation if you actually had the actual wording, the actual literal meaning is literally saying that it is impure. So therefore, if we're going to on and on always say, well, I've got a metaphorical interpretation for this, he said, then in that situation, you're going to find yourself describing and giving a metaphorical interpretation for each and every single thing. Then in that situation, you're really right there going to find yourself avoiding Sharia in everything in Sharia because you're going to be giving it a metaphorical description, a metaphorical interpretation. And then what you're going to end up with is bringing in a metaphorical interpretation to the religion entirely. And that's basically absolutely not acceptable. And he said, because anyways, the different nusus or the different texts in the religion are very few. So we're of course, if we're speaking about, just describing things based on the general description, then in that situation, you're going to find yourself avoiding Sharia entirely, or at least giving a metaphorical in these narratives that are off what the text is actually saying. So what he wanted to say is that would be dangerous. It would be really dangerous to get a metaphorical interpretation because without us realizing, we can go really off in understanding Islam itself. And we have to stick to what the text is saying, that's what Islam is. Okay, I know we passed our time. So what I'll do, alhamdulillah, we know that we kind of passed a good amount. If there are any questions, we still didn't answer the questions that we said we were going to answer. We're trying to get as much, inshallah, explained. So we will continue tomorrow. inshallah. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to listen to them. If there isn't, I feel so intimidated.
What are we talking about tomorrow?
So there is this story, a man comes to the Prophet ﷺ and actually gives him some alcohol. What happened? How did the Prophet ﷺ, he gives him some alcohol. What did the Prophet ﷺ do when he was given that gift? It was quite funny. I was watching this video during Ramadan. I guess this lady knocks at this Muslim's door and tells him, "Hey, I got you a bottle of wine
Oh,
to
yeah, I
celebrate
saw
your
that.
Ramadan." That was so funny. All right.
I never knew this story, subhanAllah.
Yeah, so let's see. Let's see what the story says, inshallah. And of course, what about selling? When we're looking at, I guess, selling things that are considered impure, things like, is it permissible to sell things that are impure, but then there's some benefit in them? Like, for example, we're talking about animal droppings, for example. That can that be used as a fertilizer? We'll also talk about, inshallah, are we allowed? We wanted to talk about that today, but I guess due to timing, I won't keep you. Are we allowed to, I guess, do the transformation? We're transforming this wine and you're using it perhaps in tiramisu or using it in your bakery for different substances. Are we allowed to do that? Is that permissible? Or probably maybe marinate or maybe the meat with it, steak, etc., gives it a good moisturizer. Are we allowed to do that? Things like what about other substances? We're trying perhaps, maybe tiramisus. Of course, you're literally putting that brandy and that alcohol on top of it. But what if we're going to bake it? Is that permissible? And in breads, they might use it in breads, baking items, because it makes it very moisturized and gives it good texture, etc. Is that permissible? And what if we're making something? They used to actually make a kind of a jam. Now, that one is really rather ironic, but this jam, they would actually have fish, salt, and alcohol to make this kind of jam. I could not wrap my head around that, but that's more to come. Okay. I absolutely couldn't. Wait a minute. I thought the Hanafi madhab was saying that you could actually drink beer. Is that even true? Is it true that the Hanafi madhab said that? Stay tuned to learn more. Inshallah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Number 5, when it said about its shirk, I know it's early to decide which one makes sense more, because we didn't finish him yet. We still have more point to discuss about Regis, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. So, but I feel that it's okay to say that it makes more sense that when they describe Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, that this rijis or the wine or alcohol is shirk, because the ayah tell us about it, conclude all the she decide that the al-khamr and al-ansab wal-azlam, all this, it put them in one basket. So can we say it makes sense that it's shirk, or still early?
That al-khamr is shirk?
Yeah, as Abdullah bin Abbas said.
So no, it's not shirk. He didn't say that
it's shirk.
No, he was saying, if you look at the word that he had used, okay, he said جُعِلَتْ عِدْلًا لِلشِّرْك. So
Nadir.
Nadir. What is a nadir and what is al-adl? Al-adl is basically when you're talking about something equivalent in its, let's say, in its sin, but it's not shirk because this is a sin. Shirk is relating things as associating them with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a completely different thing. So that's why he said idlan nadir is not, nadir is al-musawi, is meaning that it is equivalent in its danger. Okay, but it doesn't mean that it is shirk. So this is a sin. So if a person were to engage in that sin, it wouldn't get them out of the fold of Islam. It wouldn't get them out of the fold of Islam. They would still be Muslim,
Yeah,
but they will be held accountable for the sin.
So it gives the meaning of the same meaning of shirk, but it's not shirk. It keep him Muslim, but he get the same ithm or.
Well, the same sin and the same accountability.
Yeah.
So yes and no. Let me explain this one. So the same accountability in terms of maybe perhaps Judgment Day, that they will be held accountable for drinking in a, let's say a severe punishment on Judgment Day. But is it the same type of accountability in this dunya? The answer is no. Because we're going to go farther and see that even within Islam, for example, if the person were to drink, what is the punishment? Is it 40 lashes? Is it 80 lashes? We're going to see that later on. But if they were to kill, definitely they're going to be held accountable for the killing. Okay. But if, let's just say they were just drinking, they didn't go far, at least with their let's say, how intoxicated they had become. Okay, then in that situation, is it 40 lashes? Is it 80? But that means they're still within the fold of Islam. Okay, the Khawarij were the ones that regarded and used this evidence. Okay, they used this also as an aiding evidence to say, well, here we go. Look, al-khamr, al-maisir, al-ansab, al-islam, exactly like we were saying. It was saying, well, it's on the same level, and therefore the sin itself, a major sin or a minor sin, would get the person out of the fold of Islam, because they also used this ayah as you had used it right there and said, well, there we go. If it's equivalent to it, then therefore al-khamr, al-maisir is basically a form of shirk. All right. So when we would see, I guess, this interpretation, considering that major sins are equivalent to shirk, meaning getting them out of the fold of Islam, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah regarded that no, there's a difference between a sin, because the Prophet ﷺ related and even dealt with those that committed the major sin. He basically prayed Salat al-Janazah on them. He basically had considered that perhaps maybe you could see some Sahaba, they had, Abu Mahjan al-Thaqafi. Abu Mahjan al-Thaqafi, he was addicted to drinking, literally addicted to drinking. And he would come and present himself that he had drunk. And he would ask to get punished for it. But that's when Umar ibn al-Khattab gets so angry, and he basically says, didn't he have enough? He drinks, and then we would hit him for it, flog him for it. He would drink again, flog him for it. And it's like, isn't it enough already? And the Prophet ﷺ commented on another Sahabi when, of course, probably had an addiction as well, and they started cursing him. But the Prophet ﷺ said, don't do that, because he loves Allah and his messenger. So that's to tell us that, when we're speaking about the Prophet ﷺ saying that he loves Allah and his messenger just for the sin, yes, definitely we're still going to hold him accountable for it. And even when al-Ma'az and al-Ghamidiyya, when they were stoned for adultery, the Prophet ﷺ had said that after getting their punishment, that they were actually in Jannah itself. So when you look at that, that actually tells you that the implication of a major sin is completely different than the implication of shirk, because the implication of shirk, this person is kafir, out of the fold of Islam, just by probably, maybe they were in a battle, I don't know, they got killed or whatever. That doesn't mean it wipes away the implication of what choices they had made. But when it comes to drinking, no, the implication is going to be different. If it's a Muslim, then that's a major sin. If they were punished for it, then that's a sin remover, basically. You see the difference?
Yeah. And the Sahaba, when they said that after they, during the riwayah of Abdullah bin Abbas, when Allah said that they decided that the alcohol is haram, so the Sahaba, they woke and tell everyone that it's haram. So the Prophet ﷺ said that وَجُعِلَتْ عَدْلًا للشرك, or the Sahaba, they explain it.
Not adlan, idlan. Idlan means equivalent.
Yeah, عدلا. So the Sahaba, they explained that, or they got it
That
from...
was their explanation. That was their explanation. Right, that was their explanation. And because they understood Lugha Arabiya, so they were capable of seeing that once it is put within, like you said, within the same basket, it was made as equivalent to it, because such an addition is indicative that this is at least in the same, let's say, in the same manner, in the same effect, in the same danger, and certainly having the same level of how we have to avoid it. Just like we need to avoid shirk, we also need to avoid khamr and maisir.
So like he make it like very big issue, so they get scared to...
Of course, absolutely. So they could recognize, the danger, the momentum, and certainly the gravity of what they're actually dealing with right here.
Yeah. Most time we read on the some bar of chocolate, it's chocolate alcohol. It this mean alcohol?
No, chocolate liquor is not right. Chocolate liquor is not alcohol. Okay, it's a different substance. It's not alcohol.
It's the taste of the chocolate when it's so dark.
Well, chocolate liquor is basically think of it as the juice that comes out of the chocolate. That's a completely different thing. It's not liquor. It's not alcoholic.
Liquor, not alcohol.
It's not alcoholic.
So
just as if you were to squeeze the grapes, okay, just by squeezing the grapes and getting the juice out of the grapes, it doesn't make it alcohol because it's not fermented.
So what we read it on the store, liquor, it's not wine.
Right. So when you look at wine, it has a certain level of alcohol, and that doesn't happen unless basically a certain process of fermentation that happens. And that process of fermentation is what makes, the chemistry of alcohol. But chocolate liquor doesn't contain the chemistry of alcohol. That's what I'm trying to get to. It's a chemical substance. So alcohol, why does it become alcohol? If I had maybe barley juice, grape juice, maybe, I don't know, I also put maybe dates in water, and then the water, basically I let it stay ferment for some time, then I had just made alcohol right there. Okay, because the fermentation process, the timing of it, it starts out with basically getting out some certain levels of yeast. And so in the beginning, it kind of tastes different, but then this the timing of it, the farther and the longer the process of that fermentation, the more powerful it is. It basically is a chemical. But chocolate liquor doesn't have alcohol. Okay? So don't let the word liquor confuse you. It's basically not alcoholic.
Liquor store.
Liquor stores are basically stores that sell liquor, that they sell basically alcohol.
Ah, so
Okay,
then,
that's a different story.
ah,
Okay, liquor stores sell alcohol and wine, beer, that's what you're going to find in them, in the different brands, and every single brand basically has its, I guess, ingredient or has its way, and basically even the power for brand A is different than the potency of brand B, for example, and the shots that you would take are going to determine how long it had been fermented and so forth. So even the Sahaba, they did recognize all of that. Definitely not the same brands, but they did also have something very similar to that as well. There's a difference between النبيذ and the alcohol that is made of grapes and the alcohol that is made of barley, and definitely the ones that were made of grapes were definitely more expensive than the ones that were made of barley, and certainly it was different prices, it was different power, and it was basically the amount, and the longer the fermentation was basically going to be more expensive and definitely more powerful in getting the person intoxicated. And of course, the more intoxicated the person is, the more they're feeling that they're disassociating themselves with the world. So they go into some level of, what is the word, Noura? Ecstasy or ecstasy? What is the word, Noura? How would you correct me with it?
Ecstasy.
Ecstasy. There you go. Ecstasy.
There's
so
a
they-
shadda on the ta.
Shadda on the ta. Ecstasy. Okay, there we go. Ecstasy. So that's basically it. So you basically take it into, of course, a different level of fermentation.
ah,
And that's going to determine the potency of that substance.
okay. Jazakallah.
Okay. وإياكم. Sorry if I took you into a completely different world,
No, it's include the same subject.
Of course, we have to be aware of it. So inshallah, tomorrow we're going to be continuing. What was it? What point are we doing right now? الثامنة.
We done seven.
Oh, no. Actually, it's السابعة.
Yeah, we done. Not yet.
Oh,
Not
no, we're still going to say this story right there. So this is right there. The man that came to give the Prophet ﷺ a gift, and that gift was basically alcohol. Let's see what happened, right? So this is it. Inshallah, subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Stay tuned for more. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa barakatuh.